after midnight, so the guys who lived in the park could sleep and stuff. But it was, so there was a whole setup of power. But yeah, it was on. The entire time it was installed. It was supposed to be installed for a year at that venue and then moved to another venue for 4 more years. But it was installed in 2009, and right after that, like many cities, the city of Philadelphia didn't go bankrupt, but it came close to going bankrupt. So the venue that was going to take it couldn't afford to take it, so it was just installed.
Aside from Dred Scott being a reference to the historical slave event thing,
Yeah.
I was wondering, does that possibly reflect your views on the future and tie back to how you asked do we have hope for the future? Do you have hope for the future?
Well, I mean, yes and yes. I mean, on the name, I mean, I had dreadlocks at the time. I was never a Rasta, but I did have dreadlocks, and I still sort of halfway do. But they got down to my knees eventually. And, I had dreads at the time, and I had a lot of friends who were musicians. And so, they were punk rock musicians. And so I knew Virus X. I had somebody was friends with Joey Shithead, and I'm like, all right, people have, you can take a stage name, so why can't I, as a visual artist, do that? And I should take a name that references something that I like it. So, oh yeah, no rights to a black person has, but a white man has got respect. That's really cool. And so, my name, my parents named me Scott, so like I had dreadlocks. Instead of being Jimmy Dredd, I'd be like Dred Scott. It's perfect. But I did spell it differently with D-R-E-A-D. And, it's not so much, while I'm not a Rasta, I did like the Rastafarian concept of dread. But I also like the dread as in fear. And people would say, oh, you're dreadful. I'm like, all right, I can take that. And then as far as hope for the future, I do, but it's also really soberly kind of confronting the world the way it is. I think the world, I get up in the morning and I find the world is just intolerable, especially because it doesn't have to be this way. It's like, if you were alive during, 1820 America and you were looking at it and said, God, one section of society is owning another section of society, how could you, with what you know now, find that to be a moral and tolerable position? Well, with some historic perspective, in 200 years, I hope people look back and say, how did people live in a society where the incarceration rate among black men was 12%, where people sitting in Denver are blowing up kids in Pakistan, where people weren't enslaved, but they had to go find somebody to, instead they weren't owned, they had to go find somebody to rent them for the day. And people were crossing borders and leaving the family and possible risking death. How could they do that? How could they have private property? It's crazy. It doesn't make any sense. And so I think at some point people will have that, but right now we're living it. So even though most of y'all probably will say, well, gee, this mass incarceration thing is kind of messed up. Oh man, my cousin's a messed up guy. He did some foul stuff. He was slanging rock, and what are you gonna do? And so I do have hope for the future, but it is really based on looking at all these contradictions and seeing the potential in people. And I don't feel sorry for people, and I don't pity them. I think people have to transform themselves as part of transforming the world. And I say sort of people need to fight the power and transform the people for revolution. And so there are people that are willing to people are willing to kill each other and die over nonsense, just utter nonsense in the society. And, people are caught up in a lot of Scarface is a hero, and it's crazy, and so it's like there's some real problems even amongst the people, bigger problem amongst them. This government we're living right now, where two sections of power, can't agree, and so what do? They starve kids on food stamps. That's what this government shutdown is. They're holding people hostage because one section of the government, the conservative Republicans, on the one hand, they want smaller government. They don't like health care. They don't the way that's being rolled out. They're trying to protect one section of capitalism against the other section of capitalism. But they also really are, have a base that's actually thoroughly racist and they hate Obama. I don't like Obama. There's plenty of reasons to hate on Obama. But, the reason they are is not mine. And so they don't like that. They're willing to hold. They even know that the healthcare law had gone to a conservative Supreme Court and they found it constitutional and legal. They didn't find some of the things where it would actually be the most interest, most needs of the poorest people constitutional, but overall they felt that it was constitutional. So when they don't get a ruling at this conservative Supreme Court, they say we're going to blackmail the government, blackmail people. And And so, this is, it just makes, stuff like this makes me, and it should make you sick. And so, so I could soberly confront that, and then I try to make argument, help people imagine how it can be different. Imagine a world without America. That's going to take a lot of struggle. Thank you for that. I want viewers to think. I really want people to think about some of the questions I'm raising. Some of my book is more direct and sort of has answers. And much of it, though, is a lot more about questions. And one of the things I like about visual art, when you read a book or see a film, most books or most films are linear. A happens and B happens and C happens. And with visual art, a lot of times it's much more non-linear. It's just kind of iconic, an image or something is put before you, and the audience can bring what they want to it, and then it have a lot of, a different kind of conversation and thought process we see in visual art. And so I do want people to think. I want them to, question a lot of long-held common sense assumptions about America. I realize that in a society that's so divided that some people are going to look at, this is a polarized world, and when I make books say about the American flag, some people are very passionate about it. Some people will say, well, look, this is the flag my father fought for. How dare you disgrace it? It's a desecration. Other people will say, well, the flag was on the arm of a cop who killed my brother, and that cop kicked over the body to make sure the nigger was dead. I am so glad for somebody to speak for me. And so there are these profound divisions that exist. And I think that a large part of people who see my work will think, yeah, that speaks for me. I wish somebody else had said that. It was sort of like when I first heard Public Enemy or NWA, when I heard Enemy is fuck the police. It's like, yeah, that was my experience. Somebody concentrated what I had vague thoughts of in a way that actually enabled people to act on it. And so I do think there's a significant section of mine really agrees with me. And then there are other people who are like, I never thought about that like that. And then some of them who bitterly disagree. The people who want to be dead, or what's the proper way to display U.S. flag, a lot of art people in the arts said, man, those people just don't get it. This work is about freedom of speech. It's like, no, actually people in the arts don't get it. Those people got it. The people that thought that this was critiquing the U.S. flag and enabling people to have a conversation about that, they understood it. It was not a work about the First Amendment. It was a work about what U.S. patriotism represents. If you are into mindless patriotism, you're not going to like the work. And so those people got it, and that's fine. And so I want people to think about it, but they hadn't necessarily thought that there would be other people that really vehemently and consciously disagreed with them. And so I do want people to think, and then as far as audience, one of the things, in so much contemporary artwork, a lot of it's very inaccessible. You have to have a master's degree to kind of have a basic understanding of it. And while I don't have a master's, I have an undergrad degree, but I'm trained as an artist, and I've got lots of training as an artist. And my friends are artists, and I can read work that is made by others that you need a master's degree to read. So there are levels that my work has got, like the Burning the U.S. Constitution piece. If you don't know about Ai Weiwei, you're missing something about that work. But there will be a large audience that's not going to know about Ai Weiwei, that is still going to see that work. It's like, he's burning the U.S. Constitution. It's sort of a performance. It's sort of photographs. And why would he do that? Let me think about it. So I've really striven to both be complex, but also have a basic thing that's accessible to ordinary people. Anybody, I think, can see my work and have a basic understanding of it. If you have an art history degree, you might get something that's different than people who have lived and been stopped by the cops a lot. Who might see something different than you. And neither position is necessarily correct, but they are different. And I try and have both audiences, or a multiplicity of audiences, get something out of it. And if somebody is thinking deeply about long-held assumptions, that's wonderful. Not everybody does. Thank you.
We have to
We gotta get
pretty much close. It's 5 of or 4 of. We have the room until 1 o'clock. Is there any last questions for Dred before we wrap up? No? I wanted to ask, you've sort of been talking about it, but I do think, when I was looking at especially the El Lissitzky pieces, this idea that art history sometimes divorces the politics from the aesthetics. So this radical constructivist art that we study as early, modernist graphic design was intended to do something very concrete and to advocate for something very concrete. And it seems like, one sort of overall umbrella mission is to either bring back activism into art or demonstrate or model how art can be part of. I think the big question is how does art play a role in getting us to wherever it's to go?
Well, I think there are lots of ways it can and does. A large part of my existence was, and in a limited way, but more limited way, is about activism. I've been to demonstrations, I've organized demonstrations, I've had artwork as part of demonstrations. I think we need more demonstration and more activism. That said, most of my work shows in galleries and museums. Some of it is site-specific installations that is permitted. Some of it I just do on street corners like Monica Berman. But most of it is, in the arts. I show in museums and galleries. How I see art, whether it's more activist-based art that is more like a poster or something like that, or art that is, much more social practice work that is trying to organize conversations. All of it's part of ideas, wrangling with ideas. I think that in a country like America, or countries like it, it's not possible, even if you wanted to, say, okay, let's go get an army together, let's raise an army and go seize state power. That's actually not a strategy that would work. It would actually put people on the defensive. Those people would be killed, and people would have yet another reason why you can't actually make revolution. In a country like this, there's a protracted period of political struggle, political ferment, and wrestling with ideas. I think these ideas, some of which get lucky enough to be debated about by presidents and art students alike. Most of my art doesn't have that happen. But people, will see it. They'll see it in a gallery. They'll go to a museum, at the Whitney Museum, and a kid will see a work I didn't show, but that shows people fighting People's War. They'll be like, wow, I never thought museums could have that. That's interesting. Or somebody will see a gallery and it's like, yeah, there are people like me that are being stopped by the police, and it's people also across an ocean. And so they'll think about it, and then they'll enter into struggle. And when activism then happens also, then they can be part of it on a different level and different basis. I think that what I'm trying, part of what my art, my experience of almost 3 decades now, is really trying to say that work that is concerned with social questions doesn't need to be simplistic. It can be accessible, but it doesn't need to be simplistic. It can be contradictory, it can be nuanced, it can be like any other form of art that deals on many different levels. But it can be powerfully partisan about certain social issues that need to be talked about, and that why should there be an area of human of questioning that should be off limits to visual art. And so I think visual artists should find complex ways as opposed to didactic, simple ways to make work, because the didactic, simple stuff is not that interesting. And we've all probably heard bad poetry and bad political poetry. It's a real turnoff, and we've seen bad political art, but stuff like El Lissitzky, or I think some of my work, is actually really compelling and engaging and trying to keep with what is the cutting edge of society and intellectually stimulating while actually talking about some of the profound questions and trying to keep them.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Perfect. And thank you to Professor Kudis for collaborating.